Hey, what's up, everybody? This is BR, and I finally bit the bullet. I've been playing some Marvel Rivals. It's been a hell of a lot of fun playing it with my friends, and it's been a lot of fun playing Captain America and Wolverine, honestly. Even if it's in a casual setting. I don't know if I'm gonna, play the game hardcore like. I don't know if I have enough time to do so, because that would mean learning another competitive like game, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know if I have enough time for that now. With Overwatch, I already know what I'm doing with Overwatch. With Apex, CSGO, CS2, I already know what I'm doing, right? So there's no real, learning to get back into competitive with those. But with Marvel Rivals, it's an entirely new game. There are so many different mechanics and stuff. I don't know if I'd be able to, jump into that. Especially with all those clips that I've seen of competitive players, just fucking taking those mechanics and going crazy with them. It's just something that I don't think I'm going to be able to do anytime soon. But one thing that I am a little bit miffed about, something that I'm a little bit, concerned about, really is the optimization. I mean, even before I started playing Marvel Rivals, I heard that the optimization has been bad. Or at the very least, a lot of lower end users haven't really been able to play the game like everybody else. In fact, I know a friend of mine who wanted to play Marvel Rivals, but her PC wasn't strong enough to play it, and it sucks. It really sucks that, for a game that looks like Marvel Rivals, something that personally I don't think looks as graphically demanding as Overwatch, especially with its comic book art style in the same way that Valorant looks like a little bit. I think it's a little disappointing that the performance it just leaves a lot to be desired. But one noticeable thing I found in these settings was AMD FSR 3.0 frame generation. Now, personally, I don't really care about upscalers. I'd rather have a sharper image than something blurry in order to get more performance. But frame generation really did seem like something interesting. I really wanted to see it firsthand how that kind of technology would affect my gameplay. Because, it sounds promising, right? You get more frames which are generated by an algorithm that was developed using machine learning. And with that, the end result is a smoother experience, right? Instead of only getting 30 frames per second, you could get up to 60, 70, there could be many multiple frames that could be generated in between the real frames. And so the end result is something that is nice and smooth, something that's nice and consistent, something that gives the illusion of better performance. And obviously, with a little bit of help from motion vectors as well as the game engine, it does not result in any kind of hallucinations or very, very large amounts of artifacting. Which I didn't really actually notice that much artifacting when I was using FSR 3.0 frame generation, which is good. And, I actually did end up having a much smoother experience playing with that rather than with the default settings that I had. Keep in mind, I am playing on a 2600X and a 1080 Ti, which used to be a beast back in the day, but obviously now, with these new generations of CPUs and GPUs, it's basically nothing. Especially without the dedicated cores that Nvidia has with their newer GPUs. It's just a GPU from another time, though it is still very much a beast, alright? But anyways, I did have an overall better experience than I was expecting to have with frame generation, alright? Because personally, all this talk of AI, right? AI in graphics has kind of been a little bit, dishonest when it comes from the marketing side of Nvidia. It makes me not have such a high opinion about it because it's not free, right? It's not free performance. It's not free in the sense that you're going to have a good picture quality while also having more frames, because otherwise it would just be a hands down yes, from everybody, right? But this technology does have its limitations. After all, the big problem, the one that is trying to be overcome by these machine learning algorithms, is that it's trying to generate new content out of missing information. Because if you're rendering from a smaller resolution, right? In this terms, I'm talking about AI upscaling. When you're trying to render something from a smaller resolution up to a bigger resolution, you gotta fill in the blanks. For example, if you have a 1280 by 720 picture and you wanna blow it up to 1080 by 920, you're going to have to fill up around 1 million pixels in order to fill that 1080p canvas. And most displays already do this, in a standard way, which is just to fill it up with the information that's already there from a 1280 by 720 picture. But that just makes it look blurry, right? It makes it look pixelated. It doesn't look nice because some pixels are not perfectly translated to that bigger display resolution. So with AI upscaling, what you're trying to do is you're trying to smartly fill that information with information from a machine learning algorithm so it looks better, it looks sharper, it doesn't look pixelated. And for the most part, on a still image, it actually does a pretty good job. But once you get into actual motion, once you get characters moving, once it has to predict things that are going to come up maybe 2 to 3 to 5 frames later, it starts to struggle, right? It starts to look bad. Because then that information tends to stick around. I mean, it all depends on how it's implemented, but there are issues with AI upscaling. And these similar issues exist with AI frame generation because, again, you're trying to fill in the blanks with information you already have. And technically, displays already do this. If a display is running at 120 Hz, but your game is only running at 60 FPS, well, it just copies that previous frame. It doesn't display a black image for every single frame that isn't present. Instead, it just copies it for the previous one. And so with AI frame generation, that's the problem that it's trying to solve. It's trying to fill in the blanks, but in such a way that it actually looks believable, that it looks like the computer is actually making those frames rather than just copying from a previous one using the information from the real frames. And because of that methodology, there are significant limitations. We can cheat it, right? And honestly, the end result, especially with AMD FSR 3.0, which is apparently vastly inferior to whatever NVIDIA is delivering with DLSS, I think at the very least, frame generation works the way that it's supposed to and does a pretty good job. Personally, I don't like using it with upscaling. I think upscaling just causes the hallucinations to get even worse because, again, those errors that are present in upscaling transfer over to the multi-frame generation. I think that on its own, frame generation is actually a pretty good technology. And I think that if it's properly utilized, then it's going to benefit a lot of people. I think AMD making FSR available for everybody is pretty damn cool, and I think it works phenomenally, especially for a game like Marvel Rivals that has a comic book aesthetic game, so it doesn't have to do as much work as it would probably be needed to for something that's a little bit more realistic looking. But there are still some problems that I kind of knew already, and going into Marvel Rivals, it just kind of validated those criticisms that I had before. And obviously that first one is going to be how the performance is really bad for a game that doesn't look like it needs that much horsepower to justify its graphics. Like, disregard the fact that this game was made in 2025, right? It doesn't really matter. The game doesn't look like it requires that beast of a computer. So to me, FSR 3.0 just feels more like a crutch in a way. Like, hey, we can't get the game to be running at 60 FPS on these lower end computers, so rather, we're just gonna, slap on AI frame generation, which is one of those uses that I really don't like seeing, all right? Yeah, it's great for developers, but come on, man. There has to be some quality assurance to the product. And the sad part is that I don't think that Marvel Rivals has any incentive to improve their performance because people are paying for the microtransactions, they're playing the game, even with all these issues with optimization. Even if the developers wanted to improve the game, I don't think they could, convince their corporate overlords to say, hey, I think maybe we should improve the game. Maybe we should invest into game performance so that way more people can get into the game. And then the executives are going to look at them and be like, well, people are already buying it. I don't think it's like, really, how many people are actually going to play the game just because it runs a little bit better? How many people? 5? No, they should really just get a better PC. We're already making a lot of money as it is. Do we really want to spend a little bit of our money to improve the performance? Man, that sounds like it's going to cost a little bit. You know what? Nah. Let's just pump out more skins, pump out more content. If those people are really complaining about the performance, they should just upgrade. And on top of that, frame generation isn't perfect. While I did say that there is minimal hallucination, I do notice that there is, at the very least, a little bit of ghosting and a little bit of, just like remnants of the previous frame when I'm playing the game. It isn't as noticeable as it would be on a realistic game, but I kind of notice these little things. Obviously, not everybody's going to notice it, But one thing that everybody is going to notice is the lag that you get when the actual frames per second dips below 30 FPS, because then that feels laggy as crap. It feels like you're playing a game over Discord streaming. It is really that bad when the game starts dipping below. And when there's a lot of particle effects just flying left and right, yeah, you start feeling that frame generation lag because the game doesn't have enough information to compensate for that. So at the very least, right, if Marvel Rivals never ends up making the game more optimized so that way you get at least higher peak performance, the least I could ask for is to somehow make the performance more consistent. Because I feel that frame generation would obviously benefit from a more consistent frames per second rather than it is now, where the particle effects just kind of overwhelm the GPU at times. There are times when the frame rate just dips, when alts are just going left and right. I think there's a little bit of work there that could be done so that way you can prevent those really huge spikes and dips in performance. That would definitely help the frame generation without having to overhaul the entire game. And I already know what some people are going to say, and that's with NVIDIA Reflex, right? Especially with the new technology that NVIDIA is going to pump out with DLSS and everything, that these issues are going to be solved because the game is going to be able to take an input independent from the graphics shown, but that doesn't solve the underlying problem that AI requires information to make those new frames. Even if the game takes input with zero delay, right, independent from the graphics that you see on screen, frame generation is still reliant majorly by the information given from real frames. But honestly, those two caveats aren't really like my main concern with frame generation. I think the technology is cool, and overall, I think it should be adopted. I think it's a great addition to modern games, so that way you get a little bit of a boost in smoothness, even if it comes at a consequence of input latency. If you're playing the game casually, it's not going to matter. And if you're a competitive-oriented person, I think you should be pushing for better base performance out of your games rather than, companies relying on these weird optimization tricks. My biggest issue is just the fact that I know that NVIDIA is just going to try to capitalize as much as possible through the hype that multi-frame generation is going to provide. Like, honestly, the goal of NVIDIA to charge $2,000 for their top-of-the-line GPU, which, alright, I get it, it's a top-of-the-line GPU, not everybody's going to get it, right? But the fact that it influences the prices of everything else because of frame generation and because of DLSS upscaling rather than raw performance is a little irksome, because they kind of benefit from people just kind of making their games unoptimized, because then they're going to require frame generation and upscaling in order to run well, which causes this feedback loop, right? And majorly, the only people that get screwed over are consumers, because now customers are going to be reliant on games handling this technology well rather than relying on it like a crutch. And you know that with these big AAA publishers, they're just going to rely on that like for everything, rather than it being used in a utilitarian way that benefits both the customers and the developers. Personally, I still think that AI upscaling is still kind of a ripoff, just because it diminishes picture quality considerably and no amount of sharpening ever makes it look as good as native resolution. But at the very least, frame generation is a pretty cool technology that works great when the base game already runs at a decent frame rate. However, we already know that it's going to be used as a crutch, both by developers and by NVIDIA to push their graphics card to sell at higher prices. Hey, if you want higher frames, you gotta pay up. Otherwise, that old GPU of yours, well, who's to say that it's going to support our latest AI upscaling technology? And if you want to say that I'm being a little salty bitch just because, I'm still running a 1080 Ti, well, you know what I have to say about that? That's fair. I don't want to spend money every single generation just to get the latest thing, just so that way my games can run at a reasonable frame rate, all right? 1080p, 60 FPS isn't that big of an ask, guys. Come on. Why do games need to be upscaled to 1080p? That's really the ridiculous part. We were supposed to have the native 4K resolution being the standard like 4 years ago. What happened to that? I'm still a little bit pissed off about that, but whatever. NVIDIA is just going to sell their graphics cards at higher prices for this new technology that really isn't justified. If you're paying $2,000 for a GPU, Are you really going to want to use frame generation and upscaling? No, you want good raw performance. And what sucks is that AMD is just going to follow suit. So in a way, I think that the way that Marvel Rivals is optimized is just kind of like a consequence of these bad practices by NVIDIA and all these other graphics card manufacturers. And by other, I do mean the only two other people, you know, AMD and Intel. It's a little depressing. But anyways, that's all I really have to say. Tell me what you think about it down in the comment section below, and I'll catch you on the next one.